dupe it. And as it fades in and out, whatever. So, yeah, well, as much as you can. So, brief bit about who I am. Any of you guys hear me talk before? Okay. I've been around for a while. I currently run a group called Strategic Security Services consulting practice, and we deal with developing strategy, operational efficiency, and all the things that Josh talked about if you went to his cavalry talk today around in the enterprise, which he doesn't like, but that's okay. I won't hold that against him. So security, I think security intelligence, wow, this is going to get really annoying quick. So security intelligence is really like I think it's like a platypus. Anybody have a good definition for security intelligence that they're comfortable with sharing? That's what I thought. So I think it's very much misunderstood. I've got a better, let me try this. I can do projector only. If that fixes anything, that's great. Anything. Are you kidding me?
No, it sucks. It just sucks all the way around right now. If someone had a laptop, it'd be great if you could swap it out and try it, but it's basically about the feed comes here, drops, the projector drops.
Can you run it straight to the projector and just
Hold on.
videotape the whole thing?
Yeah, can I do that? Can I try running it straight in? Does this thing have a
Video camera?
I mean, if it doesn't like the digital out, then it doesn't like the digital out. But let's just at least have an idea of what the F is going on right now. Well, if it flips, it flips. But at least, all right. So as I said before, if it flips around, I don't know what else to try. But give it 15 seconds, and if it goes past the first couple of slides, we'll be happy. But I think, like I said, security is like I call it a platypus because it's vastly misunderstood. And I love this quote because every talk should have a Princess Bride quote. But we keep talking about security intelligence, and I've gone through several organizations already, and we started kind of going through this. And it always comes back to the same thing. You keep using that word, the phrase security intelligence, but I do not think it means what you think it means. So there's a couple things to deal with. How do external conditions impact enterprise assets? What action should be taken as a result of critical information? So this is me talking HD more fast, so I can get through this because we've lost 15 minutes. But and by the way, it works now. So it was a switch box. Blame the laptop. Why I oughta. Anyway, so things like what action should you take as a result of getting some critical information? Most of you you got enterprise people, enterprise security defense people. So this is for you, by the way. If you're looking for ODA, you're on the wrong track. So the reason we get, I think this is important because we find that organizations want to know what's going on. In fact, they may subscribe to a bunch of different feeds. They do some research themselves to try to understand their adversaries, their industry, their climate. Unfortunately, it all ends up as paperweights for the most part. So security intelligence is not the same thing as threat intel. Okay, so it's basically a more comprehensive TVM type of program, and it always sounds like a good idea. But how do you get value out of it? That's a difficult thing to do. When you do this kind of thing in the enterprise, people always want you to demonstrate value of what you do. I know, it's funny that way. We have an organization that works in our group inside HP Enterprise Security that does threat research. They're asked to demonstrate value as well. Shocking. So if you guys follow Ollie on Twitter, he's awesome. I love his quote, "Harvesting FUD is not a security function." Because that's what a lot of threat intel programs do and security intel programs do. You go out there and find all the big bad things you can scare your CEO with, and you call that intel. So there is a formula to this, and this piece is part of a talk that's 600 slides, so I cut it down to just under 3. But you can tell it'll go fast. This is the operationalized piece. This is the part that makes it go. like grease on the track, so to speak. So you can actually do it this way according to plan, or you may end up in a situation like this. I reused this slide repeatedly because it's just awesome. We'll focus on operationalizing, and it's basically the execution of the strategy part, which is, I'll assume that you have a strategy. I know what happens when you assume, but So the security intelligence cycle of things, it's really, we'll focus on the middle, the acquire, the analyze, refine, prioritize, and react. And there's a couple of lines that go back and forth between these things. But basically it's picking it up, looking at it, refining it, putting a priority to it, and then doing something. All right, so the first part of this is easy. And I'm joking. This is the acquire part. This is what most of us are familiar with. If you're running sec intel in the enterprise space, this is what you're probably doing. And this is probably the only part you're doing right now. And you always want to start internally. Everybody know what this is? Changing configuration management database. Basic functional ITIL. How many of you do this as part of your security platforms? That's fantastic. That's a little higher than I would expect normally, which is good. I'm glad this is this is good. I'm actually kind of surprised. I just went through a nice, beautiful tour of the backwoods of Western Canada, various different organizations and different types of folks, and I think like 1 to 2% tie in what happens internally to what they perceive and how they look at the outside world attacking them as a whole. So you want a CMDB that it's as complete as it can be. Right? This is the complete asset registry. This is stuff that you have, applications, every IP address. Effectively, what you want to be able to do is if you point at something and go, what is it? Who owns it? What's on it? What kind of data? What's it supposed to be doing? What's it's not? What is it supposed to be doing at any particular time? And what are the last couple of changes made to it? Very simple, right? Really hard. This is probably the hardest part of security, and it has very little to do actually with security. Right? It's basic ITIL stuff. So this is app systems and everything, and if you have a system of record, you're a mile ahead of everybody else. It's really nice to normalize data sets. This is something that it doesn't get done. Again, doesn't get done a whole lot. We have different devices, different organizations. If you work in an organization that has multiple silos, organizations that have sub-business units, that have sub-business units, that have sub-business units. You're global and you have one center of security intelligence that has multiple businesses in it. You end up with 15 different CMDBs, and they all have implemented them slightly differently with different products, and none of them look the same, right? So you can't compare A to B. And just very simply, right, I'm a visual kind of person, so I put it up there for you. Data stores, normalize it, stick it into a central place, and make sure it updates in some confused semblance of real time. So real time, by the way, doesn't again, it's one of those phrases that I think marketing has taken over a lot. But real time means, to me, when I build these things, in a way that matters, that you can act on it in whatever environment you work in. So in the defense space, real time is real time, like milliseconds. In the mom and pop shop, real time means sometime this week. Right? Things move slower depending on what industry you're in. The heavy industrials behave completely differently than the retails. The finance is usually a good country mile ahead. Government, we know where they are. Relevant to assets and changes. So make sure you have this type of stuff or updated in real time. It's relevant to assets and changes, and get as many internal sources for a system to populate your system of record as possible. And more sources are better. As a general rule, and I say mostly, they're not always better. Too much information can simply cause you pain that you don't need. We found that if you have more than one source of information that's feeding you like information from a particular business unit, consolidate first, then normalize, then input. Otherwise, it starts getting confusing. And we also, this is the fun part, you want things that you know, which is probably 10%, versus the things that you'll discover, which is the other 90%. Or 89%, because there's 1% you'll never know until after the incidents happen. And you go, we never have a box, we never have AIX here. You go, then, but that's an AIX box. Happens all the time, right? The ability to be able to on-demand discover, running some kind of discover capability, whether you're doing it through Nmap in a Perl script that constantly populates a database, whether you've got some multi-million-dollar commercial tool, whatever, being able to discover stuff in real time is really important. Right, so known assets, discovered assets, normalized, boom, done. Make sure your assets have attributes. So normalized, once again, there's that word again, normalized key attributes. For an asset, things like the name, the address, the purpose, the contact name, right? This isn't something security would mandate, but it's necessary. For changes, you want the type, the originator, the asset, the approver rather, the asset, and the reason why that change was made. Right, who approved it? Why was it necessary? What things it changes? This is just a very small, a very partial list. For security required attributes, we want to know some slightly different things. We want to know the set date of a rule. We want to know when it's supposed to expire. We want to know something like the certainty. Right? How sure am I that this won't blow up something? I'm implementing a rule in some SCADA system someplace. What's my level of certainty that A, it's necessary, and B, that it's going to do what it's supposed to do? There are several really good movies recently that highlighted I think it was Zero Dark 30, that had that really cool scene where she's sitting at the board. I forget the woman's name. That one that's running the operation, sitting at the boardroom table with a bunch of generals, and they basically say, how certain are we that Bin Laden's there? And she goes 100%. Well, although I know all you guys are allergic to that statistic, so 90-something%, because nobody ever lets her say 100. But how certain are you? What's your certainty level with this stuff? And again, known assets, you want to have them attributes, security attributes, and then you get some risk-defined attributes, because we want some risk. Again, risk is like that word that Inigo Montoya would say that we keep using it, but we're not really sure what it means. Oftentimes, I ask people to put together a criticality index, right? How critical is something? By the way, that looks different for every single one of you special little snowflakes. The criticality index in one organization will look totally different. The formula for deriving it will be different. I advise you to keep it simple, because that's the way it works best. Once you start overcomplicating formulas, they become subjective, and everybody can start debating what the word is means. The sensitivity index, how sensitive is it, right? What happens if this stuff was out in the public world? Would it matter? Of course, add things like disaster recovery and continuity. And now you start building a CNDB with all these different attributes that you can query in real time. When something bad is happening, or when you suspect something is happening, you can then query it to see if that's a legitimate action or not. Right? We want mostly things that are automated. Emphasis on the word mostly. Right? I hesitate to say completely automated, because I've seen the movie. I don't like how it ends for us. We want to move past just the raw data, and this is a trick. It does get, what do I mean by this? Moving past raw data. So we get an alert from some third party. They classify it as critical, needs to be acted upon right now. That's raw data. You have to do something and make sure to transform it, to apply it to you, and then transform it into something that's actionable. So, but we all the tendency is to act on this raw data, right? And if the military did that, the planet would be gone, because there would be lots of nuclear, fallouts everywhere. The other thing you want to do is convert data to knowledge, and that's kind of simple via this risk register idea. And yes, this is absolutely all still relevant to security intelligence, although we haven't covered much on security yet. I believe firmly that all this stuff is very relevant, because you have to have a basis from which to work. In these tabletop exercises we do, and Josh describes these really well too, you sit in a room with a bunch of people that are responsible for the operational security capability of an organization, their DFIR team, their CISO, their whatever. You throw out a scenario, you point out a machine or an IP address, or some asset that they have to go identify that's been doing something suspicious. You identify that suspicious pattern, and you go, okay, now what? And they look at you. I go, well, what do you mean now? We wait for dashboard to blink red. Okay, well, here, let me give you an IP address. It's this, and it's doing something that looks like this bad thing. What is it? And if it requires you to log into a spreadsheet, email, or call somebody, you're doing it wrong, right? A lot of this security intelligence that I talk about starts with having an internal picture. There's a Sun Tzu quote about know thyself in here, but that's overplayed, so I'll just say it. Once you know what you have inside the house, then go external and start looking at what you can incorporate, right? So I think a humongous chunk of internal security intelligence is having that internal picture, being able to know what's running, what changes are currently being made, what security technologies you're running, right? What your users are supposed to be doing. How many of you guys here, if you do defense, have a NetFlow baseline of your network? Okay, that's a slightly smaller number than people that had asset registries, but that's all right. That's better than 0, I'll take that. But if you don't know what normal looks like, how do you know when things go different? And if the answer is I rely on a box that triggers some pattern, right? Real bad guys don't trip patterns. They just don't. So this is not a trivial task, and what you collect outside in the world of the intertubes is very vital. There's a couple of things that you're going to be looking at. Okay, when we build these capacities, we say these are some of the key things you're going to be scouring the internet for as it pertains to your enterprise. Your brand name, used, abused, misspelled, in foreign languages, whatever, right? Translated, your graphic images that depict you, file names that are your, an interesting trick to do is name all your graphics on your website, something really crazy and outrageous, and then do a Google search every day for those crazy graphic names. If they show up any place else but your website, you found a site that's been copying you. It costs 0. Entity assets. So you look for things like internal IP addresses. If you're my old employer, we still used a 3-dot range internally. Where's Brian? You get a chuckle out of that. There he is. By the way, does that still happen, Brian? Is that still happening? Yeah, it's still happening. You mean we haven't converted off of 3-dot globally? Good luck with that. And we started that discussion 10 years ago. More than that. Yeah, well, hey, that 3-dot space is expensive. So internal assets. Your internal server name should probably never appear anyplace on the internet, right? Especially on Pastebin. On Thursday, I mentioned this to a room full of government execs, and they all stared at me like I was crazy, like, what is Pastebin? So I closed the presentation down, opened up a browser, typed in went to Pastebin and typed in router config. And because we're in google.ca, it apparently decided it was going to find the first one that had something to do with Canada. It wasn't anybody's in the room, but they started like, oh, that IP range looks familiar. I'm like, okay, closing the screen. But they get the picture, right? All the config data, all the voice over IP data, everything was printed. And they all just sort of stared at it like this is the first time anybody's ever seen anything. But there they are. There's all their internal they're even their internal network names. Right? So if you have a network called Dark Eagle, internally, Dark-Eagle, capital D, capital E, with an underscore or a dash, and you see that name on the internet with your IP address range someplace, probably bad. So your entity relationships, and what I mean by entity relationships, both between systems, between networks and partners, watch for when your partners are exploited or attacked, or technologies that you use get attacked, because that's probably, especially if you're a high-value target, that's the way to get in these days. Why bother going after the main target? You redirect and you go around, right? You go through the back door. Industry types of information. What does the security industry tell us about, if you're running, I don't know, SQL 2000, what is it telling us about SQL 2000 right now? Sorry, couldn't resist. Everything from Linux to, whatever operating systems you're running, what applications you're running. Things that we get from the security industry are very valuable. Sentiment analysis. If you don't do sentiment analysis on your brand, it's kind of startling when you finally get that first report. And it's not going to be in real time, obviously, but you get this report and it says, on social media, people generally hate your company, right? And then you start digging into it, and then you find out what people are talking about, and you find out there's this particular group that really hates you, and then it stems from this IP address on Pastebin, and where the rest goes. So. And then, of course, things like general threat climate, right? Because it's still nice to know what the general climate of the internet is. If you work in finance, I'll give you a hint, it's not good, right, as it pertains to finance. If you work in retail, military, also on target. Various other, if you're working in a mom and pop retail shop, right, selling, I don't know, $1.99 widgets, you're probably not a high value target. But knowing that, a little bit of an eye chart, but when you start building these types of relationships, it's interesting to go group by group, business by business. And again, I'm a very visual person, so I'll grab a giant whiteboard or a huge piece of paper, or like a visualization tool, and I'll start drawing this. So you look at your top physical, virtual, human, and brand assets. You branch one level below that, you define different asset types, right? Well, what kind of physical assets do you have? Servers. We have, if you have trucks and you're a trucking company, maybe you have GPSs and trip computers that go with those assets, right? Classify all those things. And develop really, really good attributes. Surprisingly, the organizations that can query from the security perspective, their CMDB in near real time, there are no security attributes in there. It's just stuff that the business has already decided. So when the things that we want to know, like the last time that thing was patched or touched, will probably never be in there. It's in a separate spreadsheet we have, and it's in Mike's desk, and he's on vacation right now, right? Seriously, it happens. Make sure you have complete attributes. There's nothing worse than a half-finished CMDB, because it's actually probably worse than having nothing. Because if it's nothing, at least you know you've got nothing. If it's half-finished or you're not certain about your data quality, then you may turn off a machine that A, is not relevant, and B, will get you fired. So here's an interesting incomplete example. I took this from one exercise that we did. And under virtual assets, we took application and we classified things, right? Owner, data class, hosted IP addresses, known vulnerabilities. That last one kind of worries you generally, doesn't it? We've got an entire attribute class for known vulnerabilities. But how many of us fly with no risk? Again, I'm hoping zero. So identify your information sources, and there's tons of information out there. In fact, there's probably a little too much. There's open source information, ton from publicly available stuff, Pastebin, different forums. You can get stuff from commercial sources, which is often a distillation of OSINT, right? You get threat intel services. In fact, everybody and their mother is built. I just talked to yet another threat intel group that's spinning up out there in the internet yesterday. That's 7 that are brand new that I've never heard of before in the last 2 months. This may be a hot market. Right, but threat intel, but there's a big difference between getting threat intel and then doing something with it, right? That's the application thereof. So we build information sharing communities like these XISACs, FSISAC, right? That's a great one. ISC or ICS ISAC, all these different ISACs where the reason that people don't share information very well is because lawyers get involved. No offense to anybody that's a lawyer here, but nobody wants to get sued by accidentally giving out in breach the fact that they were breached. Well, in these types of small communities, people feel a little bit less compelled to hide their mistakes. And I promise you the best way to learn is from yours or somebody else's mistakes. I've made lots of them. You shouldn't. Budgets matter. When you're doing intel or when you're doing security type of intelligence and standing up a system like this or a ecosystem like this, nobody has an infinite budget, and budgets will matter for a couple of reasons. The primary reason is you have to know what responsibilities are yours and what you're going to give to somebody else, right? So there's a couple of different intelligence acquisition models. There's 2 main ones from the way we see it, or I see it. There's asset-driven versus issue-driven, all right? And they're slightly different. So from the asset-driven, you look at what you have internally. This assumes you have a really good CMDB, right? And you've classified all your critical assets, and you look at those assets and you go scour the intertubes and research and all that stuff, right? If you're running Java 1.6 underscore something, 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 because you have a security console that requires that ancient old version of Java to be used.
That would never happen.
Never happened. Every day. Todd's the king of that. But if you ever want, if you need to go from that perspective, if you've got a limited amount of resources, it's best to know what things you have, and then you can go search the internet for them, right? There's services for that that'll do that too. Like Secunio, when you give them, hey, here's what we run, what bad things apply to these services. The other model is backwards. It's issue-driven. So we look at, for example, something going on in the news, and we go, gee, does that relate to us in any measurable way, right? Does that have anything to do with us? And both of these approaches are completely valid. In fact, both should be run in parallel. But if you've got to stick bubble gum, some duct tape, and a quarter, you have to pick one, which is what most of us are stuck with. Okay, work that out. Let me know when you're done. But I think the easiest way to start, if you've got very limited resources, and you start with the internal sources, you look at your inside out. So you look at the things that you have internally, right? So you do a nice data classification and risk classification run of all your internal assets. And in 2075, when you're done with that, it's a lot funnier than you'd think. But when you're finally done with that and you have some idea of where your criticals are, what they look like, but it's not enough to know what your critical intellectual property or data is. It's also important to know what forms it takes, right? Is your stuff stored in a DWG file, a SolidWorks file, an Excel spreadsheet, some other proprietary format? Is it encrypted? Is it not? What form does it take so you know what to look for? Then search for the external issues that match what you've got, right? So you ask yourself, well, I've got this asset. What kind of bad thing out there potentially applies to this asset? And for example, trade secrets, right? Remember Occupy Wall Street, right? What did banks have that they wanted? Compensation data for executives, right? So they'd look at some of their IP as comp data for their execs and go, all right, we know what people want, right? It's sitting right here. So now I know roughly how to defend against that, at least make it tougher to access. But now let's talk about it the other way. So you start with external issues and you investigate internal relevance. So you ask basically the question, what asset does this apply to? You see something out on the internet, but there's a potential for to be myopic here. And I'll explain this in a second. So remember that DDoS against big US banks? Remember that one? So these guys, the Izzadin al-Qassam cyber fighters, were essentially really peeved off about a video or that was posted, right? So you've got people that are upset about something that's effectively culturally motivated. How would anybody have ever connected that to a DDoS on a bank, except the fact that they told us, right? But if they didn't tell us, those things are difficult to connect. Right? So how does a video connect to your banking organization? It pretty much doesn't unless you get more deep into that issue. So it's very easy to let the signal get lost in the noise. That's the problem when we go outside in, because there are so many bad things happening out there. There are so many sources to get those bad things. I mean, you can spend weeks looking at stuff that just passes through IRC. You control Pastebin for hours a day. So the idea is try to balance both approaches if you can. It's not necessarily always a possibility, but it's there. These are different styles. They require different resources, right? The inside-out approach lends itself a lot easier to some of the vendors that are out there that'll simply let you scan your environment for what it's worth, or your CMDB, and come up with a list of unique things, operating systems, versions, all that interesting stuff, and then compare it against some known database that some things fall out that you should go action upon. So you want to be focused but not get a whole lot of tunnel vision. So acquisition methods, all right? So there's a couple things. How you acquire this stuff that you're going to analyze. Scalability varies, data quality varies, and the cost of acquisition varies. So these are 3 variables that you'll see. These are 3 things that vary greatly. So for first method really is called manual, and it's defined. So it's a repeatable manual process. Something you do every day. You walk into work, you go run some script, or you go do something, right? You follow some procedures. It's repeatable. It's a repeatable manual process. So it's very low scalability generally, right? It's high cost, but the potential for high data quality is good, right? And we want high data quality when we first start. So maybe you probably start with a lot of manual, slow processes. Over time, you start adding this manual or automated define method in. Right? Whether you've got an API-based feed and an RSS feed on bad guy stuff, whether you've got a Perl script that goes scans Pastebin or the various incantations thereof, whatever. Right? This is a repeatable automated process. It's got generally a low data quality potential because you have to keep updating your script or updating your automation to make sure you're throwing out as much of the bad data. Right? Machine learning and algorithms get better every time we run them, but they still start out pretty low. The cost is really low here, which is a good thing, and this stuff can scale very well, right? Much better than the human being. The third one is that we call it ad hoc because it's just sort of it's a one-time manual or automated process. This isn't something you do regularly, right? Cost is high because it's something different every time, right? Scalability is very low, but it's again, high potential for good data quality. Any questions on anything so far? Okay, nobody's staring at me blankly, so that's good. Not too many people have left. That's a bonus. All right, moving into tool sets. So, and here's why budgets matter again. So as I go through this seems a little high level because, like I said, this is part of a 2 or 3 day engagement system that we build these things for. So this is the framework to make it happen. So you can effectively do your own if you follow some of this. Not that my management would like that, but is what it is. So budget matters. Tools got to be flexible, repeatable, and they must adapt to the way your organization behaves, to the number of employees you have, to the way you spend money. Some organizations can only spend money at the beginning of their fiscal year. By the time they get halfway through their year, right, you're out of cash. Your second Intel program should not die when you run out of money. Right? This is planning ahead. There's a buy, build, lease opportunities. Right? You can buy it, meaning you can buy intelligence from somebody, and you can buy a system to do this. You can build it all yourself if you have the capacity, or you can do a combination of the two, right? Get it when you need it, on demand sort of. The key for me is when I start looking at this kind of operational capacity is the what and the how must be operationally sustainable. What in the world does that mean? Well, it's a really fancy way of saying the person that's doing it can't ever go on vacation, which means it shouldn't be a person's responsibility. It should be a role responsibility, right? Does that make sense? Right? So it should be something that a persona does rather than a person. Because this is not something you can ever just turn off. We know that it's not an 8 to 5 operation. If it was, the world would be a much different place. So you need to be able to scale up to meet volume. You can basically act as this massive information strainer. You'll get a lot. The ability to sift through it quickly to identify things that are important to you and then manually refine and refine and refine is what's going to be keeping you going. A nice picture of one possible operations model. You'll notice something in here that I've put on purpose, deduplication. Right? If we're going from the assets perspective or the issues perspective, deduplication is actually really important because you're going to collect stuff that's going to look very similar from different sources. If you've got 2 people working on external acquisition of information, they may actually get completely different information and intelligence about the same asset. So then what? Right? That's where the certainty principle comes in. Which one's more reliable? Which one do we believe more? Right? You have to make a decision, but which one are you going to run with? So you get massive lumps of raw data, and unfortunately, this isn't where it ends, right? The next part of this is analyze and refine. You got to this is where we start converting data into information. All this stuff we've just acquired, hundreds of pages of chat logs, Pastebin dumps, PDFs that we've acquired, bad known IP addresses, all kinds of interesting things. Data analysis is basically finding a needle in a stack of needles, in a lot of times, right? And those of you that have, I can tell some of you guys have tried it because you're back there shaking your head. Yes, right? You get so much really good information. You go, crap. What's the moral of the story here? Right? What's really going on? What's the subtext? And this really is a very non-trivial activity. It's basically taking structured plus unstructured data. This is where things break down. When it's nice and structured, right? When we get a nice Pastebin dump, it's nicely formatted and everything's nice. It's great. What happens when it's videos, audio, chat logs, pictures? Right? How do you process that kind of thing? Right? There's some good automation being developed around it. We need to be able to have the capacity to filter that into our regular security intel activity. And in the process, go from that chunk of raw data to some kind of intelligence. So structured data, you guys are familiar with, right? Databases, spreadsheets. Unstructured data, chat logs, photos, video, audio. If you're doing intelligence, you can't forget about all the unstructured stuff. And then there's things like, do you mine your company information off of Twitter, off of Facebook? And if so, how? In a way that's consumable, that doesn't end up in a CSV file someplace on somebody's desktop, right? Paper reports in SecIntel are not very useful because they're very difficult to action on, especially at any reasonable scale. So there's some advanced tools required. So we've started using things like Hadoop MapReduce, and other specialized tools. I'll let you figure those out. I don't want to plug any particular vendors. Right? But these are known ways to take massive data sets, shrink them down into something usable. In the process, you get some data deduplication, and you get some good analysis out of it. And this is obviously seems pretty simple, but it's important, right? What is important to us? So next couple of things. The data quantity, right? So more data is usually better, except when it's completely overwhelming you. How do you know when you've gotten too much information, right? So too little, hard to make a decision. Too much, way too much, can't make a decision. Because you're never done analyzing it by the time the decision's already too late. Data quality, obviously, right? We want high quality data. But we want things like completeness, timeliness, and this last one, I had to put a shout out to all the people that helped me figure out the right phrase here, but it's colloquiality of reference. It's a fancy way of, well, it's a lot fancier way than I would have put it, but it's a fancy way of saying, how does X relate to Y? How closely does this relate? So if you have an IP address that you use and there's some bad script someplace and it references that IP address and you're relatively certain that it's yours, how closely does what they're talking about actually match the IP address that you have? Because it could have been somebody else's at some point in time, or it could be mistyped. Right? How much does that stuff match? A certainty level of matching, right? So speaking of certainty, data certainty is important. You have to be able to trust your input. By that I mean you have to be able to trust your human resources, right? This isn't fully automated yet, and probably won't be for a while. You want to go back and improve your data quality, quantity, and certainty absolutely all the time. And perform some correlation analysis, identify patterns in your data, basic stuff, and process the resources, right? And it keeps, this is a loop, right? And it's acquisition analysis, acquisition analysis, acquisition analysis. But eventually you break out of that loop because you found something that you have to do something now about. The analysis model, again, picture. And of course, always acquire more data, right? So you're running around, refining, analyzing. You go, hey, I need more data. I need to go pick up something else to make a better decision, refine this more. And this stuff has to be structured. There has to be a set of ways, a set of policies and protocols for you to do this. Otherwise, mayhem ensues. And you've seen the commercials for mayhem. They're not pretty. I don't like raccoons in my attic. Keep high certainty of data. The stuff that you're pretty sure about, this is sort of common knowledge, the stuff that you're pretty sure is right, or you have a reasonable expectation that it's correct, keep that, throw away the bad stuff, and remove as much noise as you possibly can. Look at your technology resources, right? And I talk about supportive work streams because you have to have a way, especially if you're working in a team that's greater than number one, how do you keep from 10 people doing the same work and fighting the same battle, right? Operational work streams are awesome. Somebody's responsible for initial analysis. Somebody's responsible for secondary analysis. Somebody's responsible for defining the certainty, and then making the call whether we go forward with this or we reanalyze or push back to the beginning. All right, this is a collaborative tool set, collaborative analysis, and you want to make the information more relevant. By the time you exit this loop, you go into prioritize, right? So all information isn't equal, and what constitutes the need to act? All right. What constitutes the need to act? At some point, you have to, something's going to look interesting enough for you to do something. This is where I think the real interesting work has to be done. The one thing that consistently, and this is just a tidbit so I don't forget this at the end, the one thing that I've gotten as a lesson learned from doing disaster types of exercises is nobody has an incident commander that can make an executive decision in the security business. So when there's a fire chief and he makes a decision, if he makes a decision to pull everybody out of that building, nobody questions them. If he says all the fire, there might be some issue, all the firefighters currently in there, bail now. You know what they do? They bail. Nobody goes, but I've got to, no, forget it, out. In an incident, you have to have somebody that can make that executive decision, even if it means cutting off your internet access, even if it means downing the most critical application you have, there has to be an incident commander whose word is not questioned until post-incident. Then you can complain at them all you want and force them to justify their actions. But you have to have somebody that can make that decision, right? So prioritization is critical, and because when everything is on fire, there's two ways to make decisions, right? There's the gut feeling. I like gut feelings. I can get down with that. Right? You can make some formula-based calculations. Those are fun until the formula gets unwieldy. And basically, this is just a very simple loop I pulled out of there, right? What's your scoring process like? How do you know when mathematically, right? We don't want a 37 iteration formula, but we'd like to know mathematically, yes, this is what certainty means to me. 4.7 and above means I'm certain. Out of what? I don't know. I made a number up, right? Develop the most simple and reliable calculation. I've got two that we've been using lately. And yes, these are extremely simplistic because anywhere beyond this, most organizations aren't even to the point to where you can use them. This gives you hope, right? So you have your threat index. When something goes over a percentage, and I didn't put that on here on purpose, right? You factor in certainty, completeness, timeliness, colloquiality of reference, and severity. You factor those in, each of them gets 20%, and when that goes over a certain quality score, you make a decision, you got to act on it. Anything below that, it's a different kind of judgment call, right? The other one is like this. We basically take two factors, the potential impact and the applicability. And if the potential impact is huge, but we're not quite sure if it applies, but we're probably sure it doesn't, and it's, so, applicability, say, is a 2, and potential impact is a 3, then you end up in an orange, and orange means it's an urgent issue, and urgent and critical we act on. Right? Different levels of criticality requires different types of answers. And again, this is very simple, but it took 2 months to develop. Why? Because we wanted to make sure that we could justify this. If this caused us to turn off everybody in the company's cell phone or VPN access, we needed to be able to say, look, this is why we did it, and this formula justifies it, which means executive sign-off. And that's a lot easier said than done. So let's talk about reacting, right? Because reacting is always a blast. Reacting means you deliver analysis. You take all that intelligence you've given, you prioritize it, you've got a recommendation out of it, and now you go, all right, here's some analysis. And then we have to do more than just deliver that analysis. We have to advise action. This is the scary part, because we're asked to basically, in a military scenario, the commander asks a question and you give supporting information that supports his decision making. In security, it's a little bit different, because we get a bunch of information that we don't know is actually useful until we know it's useful, and then we have to tell them to do something about it. But what do you do? And what do you base your advice on, right? We have to do something, yeah, but what? So analysis to action has to be meaningful, but first you have to define meaningful. And then is. Just kidding. But we laugh at these things because they sound ridiculous, but you sit down and do this, you go, oh yeah, we have to have meaningful action, and then the CEO goes, what does that mean? Meaningful. Well, what does that mean to us as an organization? What is meaningful, right? Is it, something that is it a time factor that's factors into meaningful? Is it a risk factor? There's that word again. Is it a cost factor? What does that mean, right? So no, really, minimize the most. So I like this. Something that minimizes the most impact with the least effort. So you want the most impact with the least amount of effort is what you're going to try to go after. And it has to be timely. Again, let's define timely, right? For a Fortune 50, timely is probably seconds. For a Fortune way off the scales, low, might be in a week. As long as it's better than never, right? It's sad that right now, depending on which statistics you read, I'll go with the one that we use all the time. The number of days between we suspect something's wrong and the time we actually do something about it is in the 200 some odd days. It's like 270 or something like that. Don't quote me on that. It's been a while, but it's come down from like 400 years ago. I mean, that's over a year, okay? And recently we started seeing there's been a breach that from a very big company that holds a lot of information about everybody in this room, and it took them 5 months. That is not a meaningful and timely amount of time, in my opinion. Right? So how do they get better at that? So we want to act to prevent an incident? Maybe, if we can move quick. Or we act to minimize the impact. This is the easier ones, minimize impact. Right? It's very difficult to prevent anything these days. So we have to be purposeful and act appropriately, and the response has to be proportional to the threat. Boy, I wish I could engrave this in the walls of security companies, right? Response proportional to threat. Please. This requires certainty, right? Don't fire, aim ready. So the likelihood is if X, then Y. We have to know if we do this, what's the likelihood that Y will be the result, right? Strategic application of tactics. This is the be purposeful in your act that Robert Dubois talks about. Really good example. So this is not secret or anything. This is a bank example, but you get indication. Your intel tells you there's going to be a DDoS coming, and it's coming against your site. You dig a little deeper, and you know from previous FSISAC meetings or things your colleagues talk about that they're going after several of your 100 plus KB PDF files. That's how they're going to down you, right? They're going to make your web server serve up 100K thousands and thousands and thousands of times per second. So what do? Well, the very simple thing your threat intel organization tells you to do is you take that 100K file and you zero it out to 0 or 1K, right? File's still there. It can still be requested, but it's just tiny. DDoS slightly mitigated, right? 1 million requests per second at 100K looks a lot different than 1K. It's 2 orders of magnitude smaller. Very simple stuff. Apply effort, minimize the impact. You're not going to stop it, right? You're not going to go out there and go, okay, we're going to do something that's going to make people not DDoS us. If you figure that out, please let me know. We'll start a company together. We'll call it Mind Control Inc. But the reality is you want to apply effort to minimize the impact here, right? And of course, the last part of this is learn. Continuous improvement is important. And you want to learn from success and failures, right? Every single one of us has screwed it up royally a couple times. Share that. Don't be afraid to share it. It's hard to share failures, but we need to, because then that's how our colleagues know not to do that, right? Process failures, tools failures, because adversaries constantly involved, and you kind of have to too. And I'll sneak in optimize here under operationalization, right? I've got probably a minute or so. Operationalize and optimizing this is important purposefully to me, because I come from a world where if you couldn't measure it and improve it, you probably shouldn't be doing it, right, Brian? Right, so measure purposefully, improve meaningfully. What in the world does that mean? How many events do you process per day? Does that matter? Maybe. Right? How do you define the impact that a security intelligence organization has on the business? That you can measure. And then more importantly, that you can then improve. Think about that as you go back to your desks on Monday or Tuesday, whenever you go back to work. Right? What would you measure? Right? Operational efficiency matters because you want to detect more efficiently, respond more effectively. And honestly, it's really about resolving with more certainty. So detect, respond, resolve. And I want to say thanks to a bunch of people that helped put this together. But remember, hope is not a strategy. Blind faith also not a strategy in InfoSec. It works great for other parts of your life, not so much here. I hope you learned something. This is a very small part and very condensed in technical difficulties, but thank you for coming and being patient.